The desert wind carried nothing but dust and silence across the barren land where Elias Thorne had built his life. His ranch sat on the edge of Apache territory, a dangerous place where most men wouldn't dare to settle. But Elias wasn't most men. He was a man who had lost everything that mattered and had come here to lose himself too. 5 years had passed since cholera took his wife and daughter, and in those 5 years he had spoken to almost no one. The nearest town was a day's ride away, and that suited him fine. He wanted nothing from the world, and he figured the world wanted nothing from him. That was about to change, in ways he could never imagine. It was late afternoon when Elias first saw her. He was checking his fence line near the creek when he spotted something that didn't belong. At first, he thought it was a deer, or maybe a coyote, but as he rode closer, he saw it was a person. An Apache woman lay collapsed in the shade of a mesquite tree. Her dark hair was tangled with dirt, and her clothes were torn from what must have been a hard journey through the desert. She was breathing, but barely. Elias sat on his horse for a long moment. Knowing what he should do and what he wanted to do were two very different things. Helping an Apache on his land could get him killed. The town folks would call him a traitor. The Apache might think it was a trap. Every bit of common sense told him to ride away and pretend he never saw her. But then he thought of his own daughter, how she would have been about this woman's age if she had lived. Before he could talk himself out of it, he was off his horse and kneeling beside her. The woman's eyes fluttered open when he touched her shoulder. Fear filled them instantly. She tried to pull away, but she was too weak. Elias held up his hands to show he meant no harm. He pointed to his canteen and then to her lips. She understood and let him help her drink. The water seemed to bring her back to life a little. She was young, maybe 25, with a proud face even in her weakened state. Something about her clothes caught his eye. They were finer than what most Apache wore, decorated with intricate beadwork. This was no ordinary woman. Getting her to his cabin was harder than he expected. She could barely walk, and she clearly didn't trust him. He had to half carry her, while she watched him with those dark, careful eyes. His cabin wasn't much, just 2 rooms he had built himself, but it was shelter. He laid her on his bed and brought her more water and some bread. She ate slowly, never taking her eyes off him. He tried to tell her she was safe, but they had no words in common. All they had were gestures and careful movements. As night fell, Elias made himself a bed on the floor. The woman, who he had started thinking of as his unexpected guest, stayed on his bed. He could hear her breathing in the darkness, quick and nervous at first, then slowly settling into sleep. He lay awake thinking about what he had done. By morning, everyone would know. You couldn't hide secrets in this land. Someone would see her horse, which he had brought to his barn. Someone would notice the extra smoke from his chimney. Someone would come asking questions. He was right. Just after dawn, while he was making coffee, he heard horses approaching. Through the window, he saw Tom Baker, the sheriff from town, riding up with 2 other men. Elias stepped out onto his porch, trying to look calm. Tom was a hard man who had lost his brother to an Apache raid 2 years back. He wouldn't understand what Elias had done. Tom didn't waste time with pleasantries. He had seen the Apache horse in the barn and wanted to know what was going on. Elias told him he had found an injured woman and was helping her. Tom's face went red with anger. He called Elias a fool and worse. He said the Apache would come for her and kill everyone at the ranch. He said Elias was betraying his own kind. The 2 men with Tom put their hands on their guns ready for trouble. But Elias stood his ground.
I'm telling you, you don't want to do this.
He told Tom that he wouldn't turn out a hurt woman no matter who she was. He said if Tom wanted to make something of it he could, but Elias wasn't changing his mind. It was the most he had spoken in months, and it felt strange to hear his own voice so strong and sure. Tom spat on the ground and told Elias he was signing his own death warrant. Then he and his men rode off, but not before promising that when the Apache came, Elias would be on his own. When Elias went back inside, the woman was sitting up, watching him through the doorway. She had heard everything, even if she didn't understand the words. She could tell he had defended her. For the first time, she looked at him with something other than fear or suspicion. She pointed to herself and said a word that sounded like, "Why Dilia?" Nair. He pointed to himself and said, "Elias." It wasn't much, but it was a start. As the day went on, they found ways to communicate. She showed him a cut on her foot that had gone bad, and he cleaned it with whiskey and wrapped it with a clean cloth. She didn't flinch, even though it must have hurt. He made her soup from the rabbit he had caught yesterday, and she ate it gratefully. When she stood to look out the window, he saw how she moved with natural grace, even when hurt. Everything about her spoke of someone important, someone who mattered. That's when he saw the necklace. She had kept it hidden under her clothes, but when she reached for the water picture, it fell out. It was silver and turquoise, crafted with skill that took his breath away. More than that, he recognized the symbol on it. He had seen it before, on Apache warriors who come to trade at the fort years ago. It was the mark of Black Hawk, the most powerful Apache chief in the territory. This woman, Naya, wasn't just any Apache. She was Black Hawk's wife. The weight of this knowledge hit Elias like a physical blow. Black Hawk was feared across the territory. He led over 200 warriors and had never lost a battle. If anything happened to his wife while she was here, Elias wouldn't just die. He would die slowly and painfully. But when he looked at Naya, sitting there trusting him with her safety, he knew he couldn't send her away. He had made his choice when he picked her up by the creek, and he would stand by it. That night passed differently than the first. Naya seemed to sense that Elias knew who she was. She pointed to her necklace and then made a gesture that clearly meant chief or, recalls, leader. He nodded to show he understood. She looked worried, maybe thinking he would change his mind about helping her, but he just gave her more blankets and made sure she was comfortable. They sat by the fire for a while, not talking because they couldn't, but somehow communicating anyway. She showed him, through gestures, how she had gotten lost during a storm, separated from her group. Her horse had run off, and she had walked for 2 days without water before collapsing. Elias found himself telling her about his own losses, even though she couldn't understand the words. He talked about his wife, Sarah, and his daughter, Emily. He talked about the fever that took them, and how he had come here to forget but never could. Naya watched his face as he spoke, and somehow she seemed to understand the sadness in his voice. She reached out and touched his hand briefly, a gesture of sympathy that crossed all language barriers. Neither of them slept much that night. There was a feeling in the air, like the calm before a storm. Elias knew that Black Hawk would be searching for his wife. He knew that when the chief found out where she was, he would come. The only question was what would happen when he arrived. Would he believe that Elias had helped her, or would he think this was some kind of trap? Would Naya be able to explain in time, or would the warriors strike first and ask questions later? As the first light of dawn touched the desert, Elias heard it. At first, it was just a low rumble, like distant thunder. But it grew louder and louder until there was no mistaking what it was. Horses, many horses. He looked out the window and felt his blood run cold. The entire horizon was filled with Apache warriors. They moved like a dark wave across the desert, silent except for the sound of their horses' hooves. There must have been 200 of them, all armed, all heading straight for his ranch. Elias grabbed his rifle, not because he thought he could fight them off, but because he wanted to die standing if it came to that. He stepped out onto his porch and watched them come. They surrounded his ranch completely, forming a circle that there was no escape from. Then they stopped and waited. The silence was more terrifying than any war cry would have been. From the mass of warriors, one rider came forward. Even from a distance, Elias knew this was Black Hawk. The chief was tall and powerful, with eyes that seemed to look right through you. He wore war paint and carried a decorated lance. His horse was the finest Elias had ever seen. Black Hawk stopped just outside rifle range and stared at the cabin. He was waiting for something. Elias knew this was the moment that would decide everything. He set down his rifle, showing he wouldn't fight. Then he called out, his voice steady despite his fear. He told Black Hawk that his wife was safe, but she was inside and unharmed. He didn't know if the chief understood English, but he had to try. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the cabin door opened, and Naya stepped out. She walked past Elias and down the porch steps. She moved with confidence now, not like the scared, hurt woman he had found by the creek. She called out in Apache, her voice carrying across the space between them. Black Hawk's face changed when he saw her. The hard mask of war softened into relief and something that might have been joy. Naya spoke for a long time, gesturing back at Elias in the cabin. She showed Black Hawk her bandaged foot and pointed to the food and water Elias had given her. She put her hand on her heart and then gestured to Elias, a sign that needed no translation. She was telling her husband that this white man had saved her life. Black Hawk dismounted and walked toward them. Elias stood very still, knowing that any wrong move could still end badly. The chief was even more imposing up close. He looked at Elias with those penetrating eyes, steadying him like he was reading his soul. Then Black Hawk did something unexpected. He raised his hand in a gesture of respect, the same gesture he might give to an honored warrior of his own tribe. The chief spoke in broken English, his voice deep and measured. He thanked Elias for protecting his wife. He said that Elias had shown courage and honor, qualities that Black Hawk respected above all others. He said that from this day forward, Elias would be under the protection of the Apache. No warrior would harm him or his property. He was now a friend of the tribe. To seal this promise, Black Hawk called forward one of his warriors, who brought up a horse. It was a beautiful animal, an Apache war pony trained for battle. Black Hawk presented it to Elias as a gift, a symbol of the bond between them. Elias accepted it with the same dignity it was offered, understanding that this was more than just a horse. It was a promise, a treaty written not in words but in actions. Naya said goodbye to Elias in her own way. She touched his hand again and spoke a few words in Apache that he didn't understand but felt in his heart. Then she mounted behind her husband, and together they rode back to the waiting warriors. The entire army turned as one and began to move away, leaving as suddenly as they had come. Elias stood on his porch watching until they disappeared into the desert heat. The silence returned, but it felt different now. For 5 years, he had lived in isolation, cut off from everyone and everything. He had thought that was what he wanted, to be alone with his grief. But in the span of 2 days, everything had changed. By choosing to help someone in need, by picking compassion over fear, he had found something he didn't even know he was looking for. The gift wasn't just the horse or the protection of the Apache. It was the knowledge that he was still capable of doing good, of being the kind of man his wife and daughter would have been proud of. He had spent so long running from his pain, but he had forgotten who he was. Naya and her people had reminded him. In the weeks that followed, word spread about what had happened at the Thorn Ranch. Some people called him a hero, others called him a traitor. But Elias didn't care about their opinions anymore. He had made peace with his choice. Sometimes, late in the evening, he would see Apache riders in the distance, watching over his land as Black Hawk had promised. He would raise his hand in greeting, and he would respond in kind. The ranch that had been his prison became his home again. He started talking to people when he went to town for supplies. He helped his neighbors when they needed it. He even started a small garden, something he hadn't done since Sarah died. Life returned to the dead place inside him, all because he had chosen to see a person in need instead of an enemy. The story of Elias Thurn spread across the territory and beyond. It became a legend of the Old West, a tale of how one man's simple act of kindness bridged a divide that seemed impossible to cross. It proved that courage isn't always about fighting. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose compassion, when everyone expects you to choose hate. It showed that honor can be found in the most unexpected places, and that even in the hardest of times, humanity can shine through. Years later, when people asked Elias about that day, he would always say the same thing. He would tell them that he didn't do anything special. He just did what was right. He helped someone who needed help. But everyone who heard the story knew it was more than that. In a time and place where fear and hatred ruled, Elias Thorn had chosen love. And in making that choice, he had changed not just his own life, but the lives of everyone around him. The horse Black Hawk had given him lived for many years, and Elias never rode it without thinking of that morning when 200 warriors had come to his door. Not to destroy, but to honor. Not to take revenge, but to show gratitude. It reminded him that people are more alike than different, that kindness speaks a language everyone understands, and that sometimes the greatest adventures come from the simplest acts of human decency. If this story of courage and compassion moved you, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more tales from the Old West.